Hi, and welcome to Hypothetically Intentional, where we ask the question, what if we set intentions with everything we do? Today, I have a special guest, Tara Elizabeth, with me today. I'm Michelle Albers, and we are going to drop into one of my all-time favorite things. Is something that has changed my life and my journey in big, big ways. So I'm just going to start there. I'm going to set an intention, and then I probably have a big question for you.
Okay.
If you're open to it.
Great
Welcome.
questions. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you for having me.
All right. My intention for today is I actually feel like I'm going to learn something that I didn't know previously about breath work. And my intention for today is that maybe we open that door as an invitation and an inspiration for others to not only be open to what it might be, but also potentially inspire them to give it a go. So that is my intention for today.
I love that
Yeah.
for it.
Um, so I just a little background on me, and it's going to be super quick, and we can maybe we'll go there in our conversation. But I have done breath work officially, like the breath work that you do with three different people. Two were shamanic journeyers, and then your style. And I don't know if they're all the same, and that will be my question. But I just want to give a side note, like, and I also want you to comment on this. I did a lot of like breath work techniques in my yoga teacher training, but for me, this is a completely different thing. I mean, it might have similar responses in the body, but it feels very different to me. Do you have anything to say about, well, first of all, tell us what you do, talk about breath work in general, and anything else you want to share about what you do, because I know you offer many things. Um, but I think we're here today to talk mostly about breath work, which I'm
Yeah.
super
Yeah.
excited about.
And then answer that juicy question. Yeah. So
Yeah.
thank you. Thank you for sharing. Yeah, so I am a breathwork facilitator, breathwork coach. I also teach yoga and Pilates and strength and balance and stress management and all the things, right? And often people will say, gosh, you do so much, you're in all these different directions. And the way that I look at it and view it and feel about it is they're all one and the same, right? And breath work just happens to be the anchor for all of it. So when we're talking about our mind and our body and our breath and things being aligned and things being healthy, I feel like you can't really have one without the other, right? I mean, I could do all the breath work in the world, but if I'm not taking care of my body or taking care of what I'm putting into it food wise or really paying attention to my stress levels, right? There's still going to be an imbalance. So for me, teaching yoga and teaching Pilates and teaching strength and balance, they're all connected to the breath. So I don't feel that what I'm doing is in all these different directions. I feel like I'm on like this little wheel of wellness, we'll call it. I just came up with that. So,
Love it.
we talk about like this wheel of wellness. You have to be doing all those things. And it's been really interesting to me. So it's an interesting question you posed because um when I'm leading my breathwork journeys, we'll say, like I lead my weekly breathwork journeys that are 75 minutes, and it's similar to what you experience with me, where you come in and you have the silent disco headsets on and you hear my voice and the music through the headsets, and I'm guiding you through it is really like a journey, starting grounded, activating your breath, and then coming back down. And it really is this beautiful journey. Versus when I'm leading a yoga class, this morning I taught 3 classes this morning, right? And so in yoga, we talk about breath being the anchor, and we focus on the breath in yoga, as a way to focus and pause, but also as a way to connect your breath to your movement. So you inhale when you're doing certain movements and you exhale when you're doing others. And then also similar in Pilates, we breathe completely different in Pilates with our inhales and our exhales. And then same with strength training. And then the question always is, well, which is better? And, my response is, well, first of all, as long as you're breathing, that's really all that matters. And also, as long as you're connecting your breath to something, right? And so I think to circle back to your question, um, which I think maybe clarify the question, like, what is the difference, or is there a difference between like the yoga that you do or learn in yoga training versus like what you experienced with the shamanic breathwork practitioner and me. Is that kind of the question?
Yeah, I mean, like in yoga teacher training, I mean, the breath is powerful and I use it as a tool for sure, whether it be Samavriti breath or round breathing or square breathing or Kapalabhati breath or, skull shining breath or buzz,
Mhm.
Brahmari. I can't think of what it's called, but like there's all these different breathing techniques that we can use for different purposes. And then to me, like the breathwork journey, I mean, I get that it's still breath being a tool for a purpose, but it feels completely different to me. And maybe it's simply because I'm still with a headset on, it's almost more like a meditation, whereas the other breath work can become a meditation, but it not always is. Sometimes it's with movement or with a different purpose. And so I guess for me, they feel different, but same as you, it's all part of the same wellness wheel, but
Yeah.
very different experiences for me.
Yes. So I would, like when I'm explaining to people what breath work is, because I think number one, I think a lot of people still don't really know what breath work is, or it sounds confusing, or it sounds scary, or what I'm what I'm finding a lot now these days is, in the Instagram world, the videos of breath work and people having these really intense responses to breath work and crying and screaming and all the things. And I think there is potentially a time and a place for that. And there might be some people who are drawn to that, but I think there's more people than not that are actually turned off by that or scared of that, right?
Mhm.
Because that's a
Sure.
really intense experience. And so I like to just say that breath work in its most simplest terms, right? Breath work is working on your breath, right? That's it. If you just take those two words, breath work is working on your breath. And then if you break that down, breath work is simply a variety of breathing techniques that you can integrate in order to shift the state of your nervous system. So that is for me, I feel like the easiest way to explain it. It's a series of breathing techniques that you can integrate to shift your nervous system. And then within that, you can expand in all these directions. So maybe we're integrating breath work and specific breathing techniques in your yoga class. And it might be to, warm up the lungs, create some focus, set your intention before you start doing your movement. As you're moving through your yoga practice, it's okay. Now we're connecting the body to the breath. When we're doing the longer breathwork journeys, there's a completely different intention and purpose. We're here to actually create a journey and an experience. And the intention of that might be to release old trauma and emotional wounds. However, the journey might also be just to create space for more joy. In the last couple of weeks of my classes, it's been really interesting, some different experiences and responses from people who are in the class. And um there's still people that come in and we have emotional things come up and there are some tears. And at the end of a really intense journey, people are coming out of their little woo-woo haze. But I had a gentleman who attended a couple weeks ago, and I'm always kind of watching and monitoring the room. And I saw him from afar, kind of, there was like a lot of shaking going on, and I made the assumption that he was crying. And I was just kind of keeping an eye on him, and then it kind of subsided, and we went along. And at the end of it, he got up and he said, "I am so sorry if I disrupted the class with my laughing." Like, what are you talking about? He goes, "I don't know if you saw me." He goes, "But at some point during that," he goes, "I just started uncontrollably like cracking up laughing." And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I thought you were crying. That's so funny." So, and he's a friend. So we just had this, funny little communication about the fact that it just brought up like immense joy, and he was cracking up. And then last week I had two people who are business owners who attended, and they both got up and kind of almost at the same time were like, "Holy crud, I just had massive downloads for my business. I've got 3 business ideas and I'm going to go home and journal about." And so I think, breath work is what it is. And then we can create all these different experiences with it. And some of what I'm trying to bring to the table now also, because I have some events coming up in January, working with the hospitality industry and owners of the restaurant and things of that. And, the goal there is to try to explain like, okay, breath work doesn't have to be 75 minutes burning
Mhm.
stage and having this huge experience, right? You can literally integrate a breathing technique in your car for 2 minutes a day, every day in the parking lot before you go into work and have massive impact. So I think that's a really cool question to ask. And I think it's important for people to understand that, breath work is this thing and it can look all these different ways,
Yeah.
if that makes sense.
It does make sense. I mean, and I think it answers my question in the broad spectrum. What I'm understanding, what I'm hearing is it's all breath work. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
anytime you're mindfully, intentionally, and perhaps even guided with someone who is experienced in like how we guide our breath, right? Holding space for that container to teach us the skills so that if we do happen to have an emotional release or if we do happen to have uncontrollable laughter, like we have some sort of guidance around like, well, how do I how do I navigate this? It sounds silly to sound like to ask the question, how do I navigate uncontrollable laughter through breath work? But if you're sitting in your car for 2 minutes and you start having uncontrollable laughter, and that's never happened for you before, you might feel a little unsettled as
Yeah.
it's happening or after it's happening. So I think there's a beauty in having a guide, a teacher, someone experienced in the tradition of doing breath work. I say that in quotes, right? Because which modality does it matter? You know what I mean? Yoga, Pilates, breathwork journeys, shamanic or otherwise, it doesn't, I don't believe it matters. I believe you find the one that resonates with you. We all have breath. How do we use it? And I
Mm-hmm.
think, the intention of using it in a way that can support us, that can calm us, that can rejuvenate us through that calming is so, I mean, I would classify it as magical. That would be my word. And maybe not everybody would use that word, but it has, I mean, it's changed my life on so many levels. I do Reiki and the amount of sighs I give in a Reiki session simply to help me ground, move energy, reconnect, with my groundedness so that I can hold the space or I am holding the space. I mean, my breath is my biggest tool in all of the modalities that I do. And I never would have put that together had I not had experiences like great yoga teachers, great breathwork journey, instructors and all of that. So I just think, and we're so big on the hustle. So I love that you said that it doesn't have to be a 90-minute or 75-minute or 60-minute. It can literally be 2 minutes in your car. And you might be surprised at how much that changes your life if you simply do that even once a day, let alone every time you get in and out of your car or every
Yeah.
time you go in and out of the bathroom. I'm always like when I'm helping people create habits, I'm like, just what is something you do all the time every day? Go to the bathroom. Everybody goes to the bathroom. So just when you're going in or when you're coming out, put it as part of your practice. It's a great way to build a habit because it becomes part of your daily life.
That's funny. That's so funny. I usually say to people too, like I've timed out the traffic lights here, right? And so
Yeah.
a red and we sit at a lot of traffic lights here, particularly in the summertime. And that's high season and high stress and driving. And so, a red light is about 2 minutes. And I'm like, depending on where you're driving, like what if at your red light, instead of checking your phone, you did, 2 minutes of box breathing or something. And so I think the other important thing to think about when we talk about breath work is also the idea and the difference between, let's say, choosing to do breath work with the intention of, I've got something really big that I need to work through, right? I have some
Mm.
trauma I want to work through. I've got a struggle at work. I need some clarity or I'm working through a breakup or whatever it is, like just like we choose a reason when we start going to therapy, maybe, right? So, my intention for doing a longer breathwork journey or a shamanic breathwork journey is going to have a completely different intention behind it and purpose than doing like your daily maintenance, right?
Yeah.
So, your daily maintenance for me, I like to say is like training your nervous system
Yeah.
versus having, a bigger experience and a release. And then, when I talk to clients or even people that come to class, nobody needs to be doing a 75-minute breathwork journey every day or even twice a week, right? I usually say, if you're going to do multiple breathwork journeys a month, once a week is the max, because you're moving a lot of energy, you're creating a lot of shift. And like, we don't need to be doing that so often. So, once a week for that. And then every other day, you're doing much shorter sessions as like a maintenance, right? And then the purpose is to shift your nervous system on the daily and create this maintenance and this expansion of your window of tolerance so that when something big does happen, you've kind of already prepped yourself to be able to hold the space for it. And also, interestingly, most likely maybe choose a different modality to work through something, right? So I always share this with people as a breathwork facilitator. Like, if I'm actually having something really hard, right? Like I would say 2 years ago when I had to put both of my dogs down, my senior dogs, um, you know, terrible, terrible time in my world. I was unable to do breath work for almost a whole month because I couldn't sit with my own breath. And I knew it. It was a conscious decision. A couple weeks ago, I had some things come up, like some triggers. I watched a movie and some things kind of came up from childhood. And I didn't realize it until the next morning. I kind of woke up and I was like, oh, I'm having this emotional hangover. I apparently was triggered by this film last night. And I had this conversation in my head that morning. Okay, do I want to do some breath work? Do I want to journal about it and write about what's coming up for me? Do I want to go to the gym? I kind of like gave myself some options. And then I chose to dance. I signed up for this thing for Black Friday for this online dance thing. And I was like, you know what? I think I just need to move the energy differently. And I put on like a 20, 30-minute dance video and I danced and I didn't think about anything that was triggering me. And I just was able to move it differently. So I think that's important too, to just be able to emphasize like, okay, the purpose of breath work is for you to train your nervous system so you expand your window of tolerance for all of these things, but also to connect with yourself so much that you know what you need in the moment. Like
I,
you choose
oh,
the thing that makes sense for you.
I love that point because I think a blanket answer of sure it helps, it always helps is such bullshit. And I think a lot of people are just prone or have a tendency to be like, well, yeah, it worked for me. It's going to work for everyone and it's going to work in the same way. And it's like, I have a lot of different modalities in my toolbox. That some of them that I facilitate and that I'm an expert in, and then others that I am not, but they work for me, and I know I have people that I trust that I can call on to guide me through them. And the trick is when you're in it to be able to get quiet and learn what it is you might need. And breath work is such a perfect example of not so much that you need breath work in that moment, but that the breath work has given you a muscle that you maybe didn't have before, a muscle that is a pause with calm, with like with a neutrality to it, so that you're making a decision with clarity and not charged on one way or the other. And I think it's hard to make a decision charged, whether it's charged with joy or charged with angst. That decision isn't necessarily clear because you're in a different space. It's like dropping into the present. The breath work has been really helpful for me with that. And I love that that's what you brought up because I was going to ask you the question. Because for me, like my breath work, using it in the broad sense, I mean, it really did change my life because it gave me an awareness about how I show up with my breath that I didn't know existed. One of that is I'm a breath holder. I'm a
Mm.
breath holder when I get angry. I'm a breath holder when I concentrate. I'm a breath holder when I'm thinking sometimes. Like I had a tendency to hold my breath, which is super not helpful, you know? And then also I was a shallow breather. I wasn't using my full breath. And so my breath in and of itself potentially could have been adding to anxiety or just like stress and angst, as opposed to my breath actually dropping me into parasympathetic nervous system. And I'm wondering if you'll speak to that a little bit about like, how do we breathe in a way that supports us, even if we're not doing, I mean, breath work? I mean, it is breath work because it's intentional and we're doing it with an awareness and some wisdom behind it. Like, this is how we take a full, complete breath that might actually assist us without it being 2 minutes long. It's just one breath.
Hmm. Yeah, I mean, and I think that's interesting. Even last night, I was at a holiday party, and someone that I was chit-chatting with, he was asking, he hasn't come to breathwork yet, and he was like, "Well, tell me about this thing, breathwork." Um, and his exact words, which so many people, and not to stereotype, but it's typically more men than women who make the statement. I literally feel like I can't breathe. I feel like I can't breathe and I feel like I'm holding my breath all the time and I feel like I'm holding it up in my chest, right? Like these are the statements that people make because that's what most of us are doing.
Yeah.
Most of us are walking around in this sympathetic state, fight, flight, freeze, right? We're on edge all the time. I just got off another call right before this. We were talking about cortisol levels, because we're also like,
Yeah.
um, and that's the thing when the first thing when people come into the class, I'm like, okay, can you set an intention to leave everything from outside the door, like outside the door for the next hour? So we can shift the nervous system. So yeah, the if we think about when you think about breath itself, right, the science behind it, if you're breathing in through your nose versus your mouth, we can start with that. And most people are breathing in and out through their mouth throughout the day.
Mm.
We talk about that. Like if you see someone having a panic attack, or even like if you see a dog who goes into like fight flight mode, right? They're usually panting with their mouth open. So when we go into that, hyper state and we're mouth breathing, we're actually getting in less oxygen. So we get about 20% more oxygen breathing in through our nose than through our mouth. So you're getting less air than you need if you're mouth breathing versus nose breathing. Your nose is like little filters. So inside your nose, it's filtering the air coming in. So it's actually altering the temperature of the air that you're breathing in to get it to the temperature that needs to be in or needs to be at to circulate through the body. And it's like filtering out all the stuff, that you just don't need. So those are just some kind of easy ways to put it in perspective. You're breathing in more and better air, to put it simply, through your nose and your mouth. And then, when you're thinking about breathing into the belly before the lungs. I think a lot of people just naturally, we think about breath, we automatically associate it with our lungs, and our lung capacity, which is obviously a thing. But that deep belly breath, right? And also, if you think about the belly and the breathing into your diaphragm and your gut is your second brain, and your gut is where all your stress hormones are, right? So if we're not breathing into our belly and we're shallowly breathing into the lungs, we're not moving all that stuff around. So nothing is really working properly, right? Um, so belly, the easiest way to just kind of remind people is like focusing on inhaling through the nose and focusing on a belly breath. And even if you just take 3 really big, deep breaths, like filling the belly up like a balloon and exhaling to let go, you do 3 of those in a row. I mean, you can just see people's shoulders melt.
Yeah. The energy in a room will change if you do that.
Yeah, it's crazy. And people are walking around. I mean, I used the word unhinged the other day because I had a gentleman have an issue with me on the road. I pulled up next to my vehicle and had some really not nice things to say with his wife in the car, and it was a whole thing. And I had to catch myself because my old Jersey girl almost came out. Like, as soon as it started, I felt the tightening in my chest and I felt my shoulder and I could feel like the heat building up. And I was about to say something and I did it. And I was like, just breathe, let this man do what he needs to do. And then I went about my business. And it took like a full minute for my body to calm down after that. And I was like, okay, you know, here's an example. Like most humans are walking around very tightly wound. And I somewhat comically say unhinged because they're not able to stop and take a pause and take a breath before reacting to something, that has triggered them or whatever word we might like to use for that. But yeah, breath is right. And listen to me, like, yeah, even as I'm like
I know.
as I'm retelling the story, I'm feeling the tension in my body. I'm like, okay.
Well, and I think it's important to note that, like, when things like that happen, that's a great example. It's not like one breath and it's gone.
Mhm.
It sometimes takes us some time, but knowing that we can sit with that time and we can sit with ourselves and give us that time to just re-regulate,
Yeah.
with our breath is really powerful and something I didn't really put a lot of thought into until I took yoga teacher training. Well, and Thai massage training. I mean, that's really where I started. I mean, I took yoga classes and that definitely started that ball rolling. But once I did trainings for Thai massage, that was definitely that's also a breath focused, practice. And then yoga teacher training. And it's just amazing how much I didn't know until I started experiencing it, and not even necessarily at the forefront, but just almost like a hindsight, like, oh wow, this is really powerful. That just happened. I want to know more. And then digging into it. And it really is. I mean, it's become part of my being now. I mean, I don't mean my breath. I mean using my breath as a tool with intention and mindfulness to get me out of that stress and into parasympathetic nervous system. And I don't know that my day to day necessarily brings me all the way into parasympathetic, if I'm being honest, but I know when I need it, I know how to get there. I have lots of yoga props and, space at my studio that I can do it, or space at home that I can do it, or, recorded breath work, guided journeys, that I can use at my resource. And it's a beautiful thing, but I don't know that it's something that I ever really thought about until those trainings. I just didn't know how powerful it could be.
Yeah. I don't think most people do, and I've had some conversations with physicians lately. I teach strength and balance at a physician's office, and it's kind of fascinating that even the doctors, like the doctor had no idea what breath work was. And I've been doing some work throughout the state with therapists and psychologists, and I have two of them are going to be taking my 2-day breathwork training because they want to learn how to integrate breathwork into sessions, with patients. And it's kind of fascinating to me that breath was not at like the center of medical training or,
Mm.
you know, psychology training, because in my mind, it is truly like the anchor for everything. Um, and I think, kind of going back to what you were saying too, and we're talking about getting ourselves into the sympathetic state or parasympathetic state, I think the biggest thing for breath work is, I tell people it doesn't mean you're going to be calm, cool, collected all the time. It doesn't mean you're going to be walking around this parasympathetic la di da, land of being, right? But what it means is that you have cultivated so much self-awareness that when you're not in a parasympathetic
Yes.
state, because I think that's really the bigger issue, is that most people aren't even aware that they're walking around in fight or flight mode, right? They just, because it's so normal, it's like so normalized to be this way, to behave this way, to do, to do life this way. And so I think for me, the biggest piece that has come out for myself and when I work with other people is cultivating so much self-awareness that right? Okay,
Yeah.
I'm triggered. Okay, I'm over threshold. Okay, I'm reaching my breaking point. Okay, for me last week, I said no to two things, like two social engagements, and one of them was when I had already, I'd already made plans for. And 4 year ago, me would have never done that. I would have just gone because I was in that heightened state and go, go, go. And then by the end of the week, I probably would have lost my shit somewhere. So
Yeah.
it's this self-awareness of being able to like really tune in and be like, okay, my body is telling me that I am like emotionally not in the space to go be in this social environment or put my body here or, whatever it is. And being able to make decisions that make sense in the moment and also be able to verbalize those decisions too. I think that's all part of it, right? Like I'm now able to say, hey, I know I agreed to this, but I'm backing out because I don't have the capacity to do it right now and I need a rest night, right? And that's really hard for people to do too. So I think the self-awareness piece is really the biggest thing, to be able to get to know yourself so well that you can make those decisions. I think that's a huge piece of it. And then I think the other piece that's so fascinating, which you probably have like a whole nother hour on, right, is getting into like the neuroscience of
Mm.
things and talking about the brain and the impact that breath work actually has on your brain when it comes to like the gray matter in your brain and shutting the conscious mind down and letting the subconscious play and like all of these things that people may or may not realize, that like when you tap into breath work, you actually do have the power to rewire and create new little grooves in your brain and create new thought patterns, right? So I'm I'm always trying to share, you can't always just change your mindset, right? When people are walking around like, just change your mindset, just, shift to a positive mindset. You can change your mind, you can do anything. But if you're in fight or flight mode all the time, you can't actually just change your mind, But if you do breath work and shift the state of your nervous system, you get yourself into the nervous system state that you can actually change your mind, but then you actually change your mind with the breath work because you're creating the new grooves in your brain and you're creating the space and the subconscious mind comes out. And then you actually change. Like you're literally changing your mind on a
Well,
physical
and
level.
I love the layers of that because the I don't know, the flippant, oh, you can change your mind, you can do anything. That just feels so dismissive and harmful in some ways, or maybe in all the ways. I don't know. It just feels very dismissive and not super useful. But to let it be known, like what you just said, get into your parasympathetic, like connect with the brain in a new and different way. Like there's healing involved here. It's layers. It's not just like one session and you're done and you're good. It's, or maybe it is. Maybe you're a person who it does work that way for you. I haven't met many, if any, that it works in one session. A shift, yes. A full-blown change so that it never comes back or you're never revisiting old stuff. Yeah, no, I haven't met that human yet.
Right.
But the fact that it's available and that there is a possibility of even any kind of shift is hope. The fact that to create an intention and explore practices that can support you in making shifts, not saying what kind of shifts or how it's going to evolve or go for you or what exactly you're changing. And I believe that with learning the tools and understanding how to listen to ourselves, and by ourselves I mean like our inner self, like our wise observer, that is that is just a key that was missing for me for a very long time. And once I unlocked that door and stepped through and was like, oh wait, what's this, who's this kind of cool great person that's in there that I have been tucking away for so long, and what do you have to say, and what do you need, because she had been neglected for a very long time. And yes, I'm talking about myself. But it's such a interesting journey to explore. And then it is fascinating to me because it happens for all of us. I mean, I don't think I've met anyone who hasn't had some fear come up when they start thinking about making shifts and changes that will affect trauma, stories, pain points, because there is some comfort in the known, even if it's pain and discomfort. And I think we just naturally resist that on some level until we don't, and then even when we decide we're not going to resist it anymore, when that comes forward for us, it still is, it's a process. And there's resistance, and knowing that there's resistance and that there are tools like your breath that can bring a pause and an awareness or even a reprieve from the resistance for just even a hot second is a beautiful thing. And it's messy, and I'm acknowledging that like out loud on the mic. And also the potential that is there when you let it get messy and when you stop walking around like this all the time, I mean, it's like, and just invite a softening. I'm not even going to use the word surrender, just a softening of sorts, whether it be in your physical tissues or in your exhale or in your mindset or in a moment, just a softening that has never been felt before changes everything. Because I love what you said about the awareness of like, I'm at full capacity, I'm going to lose my shit, I'm this, that. But the other side of that is, do you know what it feels like to be in calm? Do you know what it feels like to be in ease? Do you know what that parasympathetic nervous system feels like? And if you don't, let's find out.
And it can feel really scary.
Yes.
Right. And so what I was hearing you say earlier, right, makes so much sense. It can be really scary, unfamiliar, and uncomfortable to actually drop into your parasympathetic when that's not a normal space for you to be, right?
Mhm.
And it all ties in, right, with these thought patterns. And if you get into right your reticular activating system, right, in your brain, which is this funnel that's actually searching for things in your environment that support what you already think or what you already know, right? So that is how we end up staying in unhealthy relationships and, staying in these places and spaces with people and places and things that maybe are not healthy at all. And from the outsider looking in, it's like, what are you doing? That's batshit crazy, right? But from our perspective, it's like, well, this feels this feels good
I know
because
this
it's
state.
normal,
Yeah.
it's what I know, right? Like, and it's much easier to be okay with what we already know than what we don't, so it can be a really hard and scary thing to remove unhealthy things and find healthy things. It's such a fascinating it's so fascinating. I find the breath and I find human behavior and all the things just so intricate. It's like it's so simple and yet it's also so complex, right? Like the simplicity is like breath is your anchor for everything, and it's powerful. And I always say shift your breath, shift your life. Like that's it. But
Oh
then
my
also, but then also there's all these little interwebs of like all the detailed things about how breath can actually do that. It's wild. I mean, I looked back at photos. I posted a picture the other day, which I think you might have seen on Facebook, and it was a picture of myself from 2018 pre-divorce, a picture of myself in 2019 right after my divorce, and then a picture of myself recently. And I randomly had put them together. I was looking for a photo from something, and I looked back and found this photo from 2018 when I was still married. And I was like, whoa, look at my face. Like my facial structure was different. It was very puffy. And then the picture from 2019, which was right after my divorce, I was like emaciated and, all the things. And then this picture from like 4 months ago is like the way I look now. And when I was able to line them up all next to each other in this little collage, I was like mind blown because it was here's what happens, I think, with breath work sometimes when I'm trying to share what I do or get people to come try it. It can be really difficult and challenging because there's not always a tangible result, if that makes
God.
sense, right?
It does,
Like if
yeah.
I'm a physical trainer, I can say, okay, here's your tangible result. You're going to lose 10 pounds. You're going to lift 150 pounds squat press, like whatever it is. Breath work, I'm like, you're going to change your life, right? And that
Yeah.
that can be like so many things. Um, but when I put those pictures next to each other, it was like, boom, here is a real live, tangible image of how breathing has internally shifted me, like from the inside out, like inflammation, health, physical health, mental health, the color of my skin, literally like the structure of my face. So it's wild. And I've seen it with a couple people, who've worked with me. I mean, a gentleman in particular who did some breath with me for about a year and a half. And it's someone that I've known for 22 years. So we've known each other through all of our stuff. Um, and he, same thing, if I could take a picture of him from 2 years ago and now, and people will come up to me and be like, what have you done to Jabs?
Yeah.
We don't even recognize him. I'm like, I know, it's amazing. So it's fascinating because it just changes you like on a cellular level.
Yeah.
And I want to touch on one more thing that you mentioned, the word soft, right? Softening. I use that phrase a lot when I'm leading.
Hmm.
And what I've shifted, and I still will say, like, okay, we're exhaling, we're releasing something, but not so much anymore because what I believe and what I feel is that we are never going to like fully release our experiences, right? I mean, we have these life experiences, they are part of us on some level. But what we are doing is like softening the load, right? Or softening the heavy. So whatever experience we had or are having that feels heavy, we're using our breath to soften that. And then we're using our breath to shift the energy of it. So if the energy of something that you experienced feels really heavy, which we could label as negative, right? But we try to not label negative or positive, then the whole goal of the breath is to soften and shift the energy of the experience. And then you can speak about that experience from a completely different perspective, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, you can't unexperience, like I always say, once you see it, you can't unsee it. You can't unexperience an experience, but you can change your relationship to it. You can change like how you engage with it, if at all. You can change whether or not it takes a piece of you away or brings a piece of you back. I mean, there's just so many bits of life that I think we try and, well, I mean, I did. I stuffed and forgot it. I didn't know it happened to me until I remembered it. And then I was like, well, now, now what? So I think we can, we can stuff it and shove it and whatever. And I don't believe we have to remember all of it either.
Mm,
And I think the things that affect us, whether they're affecting us in a heavy way that feels like an obstacle or in a light and bright way that feels like power and truth, that matters and that changes our life. And so when you say breathwork will change your life, yes, absolutely. But it's such a big, broad statement. What does that mean? It's like, well, I don't know. It's different for everyone. It's like, that's no different than energetic healing, whether it be Reiki, Thai massage, coaching, I mean, spiritual healing, all the things, all the things in my toolbox, same thing. It's like, what are you doing? Changing your life, introducing you to yourself, like, you know, bringing in authenticity and truth to you navigating life as you, but the you of you, like the real you. And that's a big statement that doesn't really tell people a lot unless you have conversations like this. And that's why I think conversations like this are so important. It's like, maybe breath work is never going to be your tool. That's okay. I feel like, you are breathing, you're using it in some way, shape, or form.
mhm.
Maybe a group breathwork class is never going to be your thing, and that's okay, right? Like whatever you find that supports you on your journey, great. And I would, in this moment, what I'm hearing is I'm inviting listeners to try something new, something that they haven't tried before. And maybe it doesn't work and that's okay. Maybe it doesn't feel good and that's okay. Maybe you get to walk away because whatever you chose just really isn't right. And you're using that pause to listen and say, gosh, this isn't for me. But maybe you'll find something new that supports you in a way that you never would have found had you not just listen to a podcast like this or talk to a friend on a street who talked to someone who did this thing that helped them on their journey. And I mean, I think it's all about community and asking people questions and sharing what's working for you, because I think we're all floundering in one way or another. And I think we all need that parasympathetic nervous system to, I feel like it brings our wise, like it brings in our, like I would say my wise old crone, you know what I mean? Like she's in there and she's rocking it if I let her. And parasympathetic nervous system is a great way to tap in and go, hey, I'm listening. Like I took a pause. Look at me. I'm trying to connect with you. And I've been ignoring you for a very long time. Can we just take a hot second and see what information you have for me? And maybe I'm listening to that in my physical body. Maybe I'm listening to that in my breath. Because there's the other thing, like your breath, if you take an inhale and it gets stuck somewhere, that tells you something. If your exhale feels really hard and labored, that tells you something. Like your breath tells you information even if you're not in your parasympathetic nervous system.
Yeah, absolutely. It's all information. And that's, in the journeys, that's part of the process, right? Like, we're not necessarily here to figure things out or ask questions about it. You're just here to observe. Like, can you actually just witness and observe your body,
Yes.
without judging yet, without trying to figure it out just yet? And that's often what will happen at the end of a journey, too. Some people will, for their first time, I had a girl who came a couple weeks ago, and at the end, she got up and she was like, whoa. She's like, I didn't realize how much I needed that.
Hmm.
Like, I don't think I've felt calm in so long. And I think that's the biggest piece. If breath work does nothing else for you, it's a reminder to find
Yeah.
something, if it's not breath work, to find
Yeah.
something to give yourself permission, to take that pause. So, and I think too, what you mentioned earlier when we talk about when you're like, well, here's a question maybe I would ask you, because I've thought about this. When we are doing these practices and integrating all the work, and then maybe we have these things come up that we didn't remember, or because I've had that happen as well. Um, do you feel like those are things that I'm trying to think of how I want to phrase the question. If something comes up that you didn't remember, do you feel like it's something that you always have to investigate or dissect or figure out? Or do you think sometimes it can just be, okay, this came up, I remember it, and now maybe I just let it move through me? Like, do I need to sit with it much longer? Do I need to do more work with it? Like where and when do you feel like you maybe make that deciphering decision that it's a thing that we need to place more energy into, or just kind of let it be?
Yeah, I think that depends. And it requires that observation, and it requires like the utmost honesty, because just like a resistance to breath work that is seems to be sort of innate, right? We have this resistance to that change of the new thing that might pull something forward for us. I think that's part of it. It might create something to pull forward that we didn't remember before and now we do. And I don't believe it comes up if we're not ready to see it. I believe that like we are protected in that way. And that's a pretty blanket statement. I don't mean it in a naive way. I really just mean like find your people in your community to support you when it does come up. Do I think we have to, relive it and look at it and heal it and do all the things? No, not necessarily. But I think if you have a strong response to it, there's probably something there that requires your attention. Because I think if you have a really big response to it, that's telling us something, just like the breath does when there's a really big, like, crick in our breath, so to speak. That's telling us something, that there's something there that is waiting for, I would call it love. Healing is love. And so for us to love ourselves through that, whatever it is, and I don't think necessarily it's right away either. Like my remembering, you know, it was there, and then I just kind of like paused it for a while. I wasn't ready, but just the knowing of it was helpful.
Mhm.
Oh, this explains so much of how I show up and how I showed up and how I continue to show up. I'm just going to hold space for myself in a new and different way. And so I think that is doing the work, but I think sometimes we have this idea that if we get this big ping or we find this big uncovering, or even if it's just like use pain in a shoulder as an example. I have this
Mhm.
pain in my shoulder. I want it fixed. I want it fixed now. Well, it doesn't always work like that. Sometimes there's like four or five different things that have to happen before we can get to the fix in the shoulder, and that's just a really simplified example because I'm not looking to like unpack all the things and trigger a bunch of people and, cause
Right.
a bunch of fear. I just think we don't always have to look at it, unpack it. Sometimes it is just like, oh, hi. Okay, thank you for showing me and revealing that. It's information that I'm going to use going forward, and you can let it pass through. And sometimes it's not, oh, hi. It's like, well, fuck this. I don't like this. I can't believe this is coming up. Or, what is this? This can't possibly be mine. Well, that's a different story. There's something there energetically that doesn't feel congruent or ease or so. I mean, that's a long, babbly answer to say it depends. But I think
Mhm.
it's really easy to lie to ourselves and to go back into that stuffing mode when it's big and when it doesn't feel good.
Yeah, no, I would agree. I would agree. And I also think kind of reflecting back a little bit of what you said about when those things come up, that it has this potential to like, hey, this is how I'm showing up. And so
Mhm.
a huge conversation that's been like a theme that's been in several conversations with different people in the last week or two is this idea of our relationships being mirrors. And not just our relationships with other people, but our relationship with ourselves, right?
Right.
So when we have these things come up and we're doing the breath work and we're creating this new relationship with ourselves, um, then we kind of have to face the mirror of ourselves, like, oh wow, this this is how I keep showing up. This is why I keep showing up this way. And then, you're going to look at your relationships with other humans, you're going to see the same reflection back. So I think that breath work for me too is like this beautiful vehicle to improving our relationships with
Mhm.
ourselves and with other people. Like my breath shows me how I'm showing up for myself on a daily basis and how I'm showing up in my friendships and how I'm showing up in my, you know, potential romantic relationships. And the dating process is fascinating. There's a part of me that's like, maybe I should stop doing breath work. Maybe my dating life will be easier because I'm like so aware of everything now. It's made dating and meeting people and connecting with people at different levels, I would say somewhat more challenging, but also more simple, right?
Yeah.
Boundaries are much easier now. Um, but it's a fascinating process when you are really tapped into your own behavior, because then when you're tapped into your own behavior, you're also tapped into others people's behaviors, and they're not always tapped in. So that's an interesting piece to dive into. That could be a whole nother podcast.
What I'm hearing is we need two more podcasts, one to talk about the brain and like the science behind the breath work, and then one to talk about just relationships and being the observer and actually like witnessing in an aware way and how that impacts all how that ripples out because it does ripple out.
Yeah. I mean, when you think about human behavior, I've done some breath work with couples. Um, and I think one of the biggest lessons, right, that you learn when you're doing this process is that other people's behaviors are always projections. And so when you look at people who have been married for a long time, together for a long time, or even just in the beginning stages, um, most people are very caught up in their own stuff, and they're not taking time to breathe, and they're not taking the time to take the step back and take the pause and maybe consider the other person's perspective. And it was funny, I was at work and my boss at work, we were joking around about something, and he made some comment about, what did he say, about hearing something but not actually listening. And I kind of
Mm.
made the joke back, like, just like a man, and it was a funny thing. And he's like, oh, you sound like my wife. And but it's the truth. I mean, most people are, I hear what you're saying, but they're not actually listening. And we don't really learn the art of listening until we've done the work, because when we haven't done the work, we're more concerned about our stuff and our response. So
Yeah. So I want to make sure people know how they can find you. And I know you do a lot of stuff in person, but I believe you also do some virtual things. Will you share with our listeners, A, where are you located? Where can they find you in person? And then also, how can they find you in other ways if they don't live near you?
Mhm. So I live in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware at the moment. So my in-person classes and one-on-one sessions in person are here in the Rehoboth Lewis area. And then I do online, so I can do breathwork sessions online via Zoom. I've done a lot of online work with people. I can do that for one-on-one sessions. I've done some online work via Zoom for companies and groups and organizations who, are doing like a monthly meeting or annual conference, something like that. So I can do that type of work. And I can do anything from, the one-on-one sessions, like I do my breathwork journeys. I can do more of a workshop style thing. I really like to do that because I like to teach. So I offer a lot of those things as well here locally for conferences where, we go through what is breathwork, how can breathwork support stress management, how can breathwork help you in the work world, and then do not a long journey, but okay, I will introduce you to 3 to 5 breathing techniques that you can integrate quickly, in your
Mhm.
car at the beginning of a work meeting, things like that. So I can do virtual work in person. I have my first, I shouldn't say my first, but my first kind of fully my own retreat that I'm leading in Colorado in June. And
Nice.
that will be breath work and yoga and movement and intentional workshops and things like that. I'm teaming up with a gentleman from Oregon who also teaches yoga and does intentional workshops. And then I have my breathwork training I just launched. So my January class is already full. It'll be my first 2-day, 12-hour workshop. That one is in person, but by the spring, my breathwork training and certification course for people who want to actually become a certified breathwork facilitator will be launching in the spring, hopefully summer at the latest. And that will likely be a hybrid, so online and then like an in-person week-long immersion program to kind of wrap up the course. So yeah,
Nice.
I'm kind of
So
moving and grooving and, shifting things myself and, seeing what works for people and trying to kind of expand how I can take things on the road or take things online and bring breath wherever it lands.
nice. How do they find you? Website,
Um,
social media, what's
So I
easiest?
do have a social media is probably the easiest. That's what I tend to be on the most. So I don't know if you want to drop links, but I can. I'm under my personal name, which is Tara Elizabeth Gush. I'm also under. I have 2 sites. The business is Collective with a K, so Collective Shift. And then my website is just collectiveshift with a K.com. So Instagram is probably the fastest way to reach me and find me. I do have a website. I honestly don't really use it that often, if I'm being fully transparent.
Yeah.
Uh,
Great. Oh my gosh. Thank you for this time together today. Is there anything else you want to share? I don't want to leave you feeling like the circle isn't complete.
no, I feel like we covered everything, and I think like we shared, I really just truly believe that our breath is our anchor for everything, right? If we're not breathing, we are not alive. It is the first
Yeah.
thing we learn how to do when we come out into the world. And so I just think that's such an important piece, to bring to the table. I like to say how we breathe is how we live. And yeah.
Beautiful. Ah, thank you so much for your time today. I appreciate you.
So
I
nice.
look forward to podcast 2 and 3.
Yeah, got
We'll
ideas.
get those on the we'll get those on the radar for 2025. Great.
Love it,
That's a
love it.
wrap for today.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Be you every day.